last week you wrote a Substack, and it's on an issue that I have, listen, I agree with you completely on, and I have waxed lyrical and not so lyrical over the last 35 years. And that is upon the rights of New Zealanders to know essentially what their government, and more specifically what their public-paid, taxpayer-paid officials are doing in the dark. It's called the Official Information Act. It was, I think from memory, brought into the Longy government of 1987, the Official Information Act.
82, I think.
82.
Around.
Oh, well, then
Yep.
that's even before. That's even before then. That would have been brought in under Rob Muldoon, for Pete's sake, so it predates David Longy. But it was something on which the a certain law professor from Victoria University, I think at the time, Professor Geoffrey Palmer, opined much on, A, on the need for one, on B, on the need for central government to be much more open in its dealings with the public. When he finally got into power as a Minister of Justice, a Deputy Prime Minister, and then for a very short period of time as a Prime Minister, he was notable for being an entire hypocrite when it came to official information. But you're suggesting that in actual fact it's got worse, not better, and that there is a deliberate attempt to withhold information from the public. Is that right, John?
Yeah, it is. I think what we're seeing is a little bit more than laziness or sort of incompetence. I think it's a failure at many levels, but I think one is it's a failure on the part of public servants especially to have any sense of vocation or service. It seems to be more about sort of evasion and self-preservation, really, which is disappointing and hellishly infuriating if you're trying to actually get some information out of the public service.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, in the late 1980s, probably the start of the century, John, the Official Information Act was critical, and it was used primarily by the mainstream media as a way of, if you like, delving into issues and seeing if the public actions of either ministers or politicians or government departments matched their private actions, and also how often policy was constructed or what the internal responses were to public controversies of the day. It's very rarely used now by mainstream media, I would suggest to you, John, because that's one of the reasons that mainstream media just works on an emotional diet in which you really never leave your own, laptop, do you?
That's right. I mean, it's exhilarating to use, and when you get some luck, it's terrific to see the raw correspondence and what people are actually saying. It gives real insights into, the mentality of the public service and how things operate in practice. There are a lot of good journalists who still plug away. Thomas Coughlin at the Herald fights valiantly to get information, but it really is like getting blood out of a stone half the time. And the other level of abuse is even when you get stuff, it's often so redacted, and so much stuff is spuriously cut out of it in contravention of the provisions of the Act that it becomes much diminished, really.
And that's the other issue I want to talk to you about before we go and talk about some cases in specific that people be aware of and that you've got some insight into. But if a government department or a local government body decides to hide stuff, and they know that they're hiding it illegally, but they hide it anyhow by giving you some papers and redacting it severely, or even just declining the interview, your one course of action legislatively is to go and appeal to the Office of the Ombudsman. But can I just say it's my experience over the last 10 or so years that the Office of the Ombudsman are useless, and they frankly should be sacked because they're not upholding the basic principles of open government. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, precisely my sentiments. I find them at best incredibly dilatory, and at worst they do your head in a little, but that you wonder whose side they're on, really, and they are the last port of call.
So I can complain to the Ombudsman to say, hey, this government department hasn't let this information go, or they've over-redacted it. It'll take you months often, and yet they must prioritise that, because sometimes you see the Ombudsman can react within days to a particular event and get themselves involved.
Yeah, it seems remarkably sort of arbitrary and capricious as to what they're prepared to go on and what they're not. It's hard to understand why they're going. They may just do the easy stuff, perhaps.
And they also seem to have a view, the Office of the Ombudsman will develop one, that free and frank exchanges between public sectors, and it may even, if they ought to flirt on the immoral and the illegal, are protected, which I would have thought was completely the contrary of why the Official Information Act exists.
Yeah, there's some real distortions in the way they express their agreement to as you say, the redaction of stuff. It's it will impinge on the free and frank exchange of ideas between ministers and public servants and this sort of stuff. But none of these excuses are valid, and they all have to be weighed against the purposes of the Act, which are interesting. They're stated quite clearly. I might just read what the purposes are. I mean, the fundamental purpose of the Act is to increase progressively the availability of official information to the people of New Zealand in order to enable their more effective participation in the making and administration of laws and policies, and to promote accountability of ministers of the Crown and officials. Well, that would seem to be a terrifically defensible purpose, which is so far at variance from the way it pans out in practice as to just destroy the faith, really.
Yeah. So let's get this right. We have got an Official Information Act which is meant to be able to look at the way in which public sector, both local and central government public sector works, and the processes to make sure, if you like, it's all about the antiseptic of light. Open democracy. If you can see the way in which things are made, then generally they make a better decision because they know that they've got the public looking over their shoulder while they're making it. That was the purpose of the Official Information Act. It worked on the assumption that you had to give official information to a requester unless you had valid reason not to. And that seems now, forgive me if I'm wrong, John, to switch around the other way. We'll give you the information if we think that you need it. Have I got that right? Well,
I'm not even sure they're thinking that you need it. They might give you a bit. It'll always be redacted. There's another provision of the Act, the principle of availability, which says that the question of whether any official information is to be made available shall be determined in accordance with the purpose of the Act, which I've already read out, and the principle that information shall be made available unless there is good reason for withholding it. So the onus has been, as you say, completely reversed here.
And of course, I regard this as part of the Wellington disease, though, that has infected and infested New Zealand this whole century. And that is that the Office of the Ombudsman is also based in Auckland and Wellington, very much part of the civil service bureaucracy, and has tended to side with the civil service bureaucracy against the public and the people. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are fundamentally undemocratic sentiments at work here. There's this general disdain for the public, the plebs, the great unwashed.
Yep. We talked about this time last week, I think, with Professor Ramesh Thakur, who said that this was essentially the West elites had declared war on the people, and I just think the Office of the Ombudsman and government departments are obviously part of those elites. All right, next bit. You used the Official Information Act, and this is what I'm fascinated by, in a specific case. You were looking for a teacher. Now, tell me about the teacher, why you were looking for it, and what the teacher had done, please.
Well, the teacher's a fellow, Taurapa, who is essentially a sex pest. He's not a convicted criminal, but very much...